in investing. You own some properties, a few minutes around that, and then we'll just get into a general discussion of whatever anybody wants to talk about. If they don't have questions, I will toss them up, and you can toss them up as well. Like
wonderful.
Omar, for instance. A question without mentioning Omar's name. What do you do with somebody who turns from looking like they're a pretty good prospect into somebody who's accusing you of running a Ponzi scheme?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just something that's came up in the last little while for you. All right, everyone, we're live. That was Barry talking to Brent. Brent is my guest today on Barry McGUIRE's Creative Real Estate Education Group. Brent Boisvert, meet the group, almost 2,000 strong now. Not that all 2,000 run the program today.
Wow.
But everyone, I wanted you to meet Brent because he's joined us at Field Law in the last while because it's pretty busy in real estate. I needed some help. And Brent's been at this, is it 8 or 9 years, Brent? How long have you been lawyering?
9 years.
9 years, yes.
9 years.
9 years. So we didn't hire Brent because he's a good lawyer, although he is a good lawyer. We hired him because he's a good hockey player. And of course, I'd have to play hockey. I wanted another guy to talk to in the department. That's not true. It's just one of the things that that Brent does. He's married. He's got 2 girls, I think. Is that right?
I do.
2 girls, 16 and...
I have a 6-year-old.
6.
And a 17-year-old.
17 and 6. So 3 girls, three women in Brent's household.
That's right.
I don't know what that's like. I've got nothing but girls in my side of the family. All my kind of nieces and nephews I'm close to, they all have girls for kids. But folks, Brent has he does some commercial law. He's started a couple of companies in the U.S. on the cannabis side of things. He's an Alberta boy. He's done lots of residential real estate, so he understands buying and selling houses and properties, commercial real estate, corporate. And interestingly enough, Brent is an investor on his own. He owns his own properties for long-term buy and hold. Brent, how did you, just to give a little perspective for people, how did you get started in looking at long-term buy and hold investment real estate?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for the introduction, Barry. I first got my first property was bought between my father and I probably about 15, 20 years ago now. So I had help going into my first two properties. And from there, I was able to pay off one of the properties and then borrowed against that property in order to purchase 2 more. And then we grew from there. Our portfolio now consists of, we sold one, 15 properties throughout Alberta, Northern Alberta, and Slave Lake region, and also in the Edmonton area.
Well, that's a decent portfolio. I mean, we've often said to people, you don't have to own, half the real estate in Alberta to have a successful portfolio. I mean, we know a few people who have purchased 4 or 5 properties and kind of paid them off over time, and that's been a really marvelous supplement to their money and their livelihood. So that's a good sized portfolio. Good for you. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I definitely had help when I started. And I shouldn't say when I started, we still have help and partners to this day. And I think partners have been instrumental in being able to grow such a portfolio. If I was to do it strictly by myself, I don't think I would have been able to grow to that size, and also as quickly as I did.
Well, and we're going to chat today. We have one question at least about joint ventures and how all that works, and I think a lot of people are experiencing the tightening in the financial markets and in the mortgage market to the point where you can only acquire so many properties on your own. I mean, if you're buying in your personal name, there are a number of lenders who go, they just say, listen, you can only buy 3 properties or 4 properties. And so if you're going to buy any more, you need to do it with somebody else. And so that's what a lot of people are experiencing. So,
yeah. Being creative in the real estate market is definitely a way to grow a portfolio.
So now, when you chat to people, and you can think about this, you might not have an answer just to hand, but I'm just going to say to you, I mean, you've been at this a while. What have been your biggest issues? Say 1 or 2 issues that have shown up through over the years, because you didn't buy all these properties yesterday. I mean, you've been buying them for a while.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of problems came up for you over the years, and what did you have to solve? So we'll just mull that over for a bit while we talk about some of the things, and we'll see if we can hear your response on maybe some creative answers to some questions. Now, here's a question. You own properties in Edmonton and in other places in Alberta, in northern Alberta. I think you grew up in the Slave Lake area.
That's right.
So in Lesser Slave Lake, northern Alberta. So what would you say to somebody who lives in Edmonton or Calgary or Red Deer, in the bigger areas, and what would you say to them about investing in a smaller center? How do they do that and get comfortable?
Yeah, another good question. I'll speak very specifically for myself, and I don't think, if I didn't know Slave Lake and the market in Slave Lake, having growing up there and having family there and visiting the town frequently, I don't know, honestly, that I would have been comfortable buying a property that was so far away.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons that I bought there, is because we do have family there. My wife is also from the town, and her family also lives in the area. So we have many people that are able to check up on our properties, whether it's just a simple drive-by to look at the state of the property. But for that, I don't think I would have purchased a property so far away. I've had opportunities to buy property in British Columbia, in the Okanagan, and I've turned it down for that fact that I wouldn't be able to go and see the property enough. And when you're putting that much money into a property, I think you really want to have a pulse on your investment. And when you're not able to do that, I think that's when problems arise.
No, I totally agree with that. And for you, when you bought in Slave Lake, you weren't buying in a town that you've never been to or never heard about. You're from there. Your wife's from there. You got family there. There are people who can keep an eye on things, and you're comfortable with the town to start with because you know the town, and then you've got people to help. So, I think that's what any investor needs to set up for themselves if they're going to buy where they are not. If they're just kind of a middle of the road in terms of being conservative or adventurous. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to be totally conservative to see that you need some special help if you're gonna buy someplace where you can't get to. And so so you need a team. You need a realtor uh, who will really guide you for what is a decent area to purchase in. I know it's, say in Edmonton, every town has its great areas and its not so great areas, and so a realtor who knows Edmonton would be able to tell you whether or not a property for sale is in a just in a more rundown part of town where you can't get the rents and the tenant profile isn't as good. I mean, you need that. You need a good property manager. You need a team. I mean, you always need a team, but if you're doing out of town property, you need a better team. Now, I'm looking at questions here. Omar has a question. Omar says, working on a deal where the seller is open to creative finance, but they want to port their mortgage for their next house out in the east. So thank you. So what they want to do, when people say they want to port the mortgage, they're talking about a term in many mortgage companies' offerings or in their commitment letters. The mortgage company says to you as you're looking to get a mortgage, listen, if you end up buying a new home, we'll let you port the mortgage off to your new property. And what that means to people is that they can take that mortgage that they already have that's on a property, say here in Edmonton, Calgary, and they can take that very mortgage and plunk it on a property in Hamilton or Toronto or Moncton. They can move the actual mortgage, but that's not what it means. What it means is that you get to take the terms of your existing mortgage, which if you want to, port a mortgage, I think what you're saying to yourself is it's a good mortgage. You don't want to pay it out, or perhaps you don't want to pay it out because the terms are onerous. So you get to take the terms of that mortgage and a new mortgage is created wherever you end up. So in Omar's case, I think whether or not this is going to work for him is whether or not his motivated seller is able to essentially qualify for two mortgages. Because in this particular case, if they go to their lender and say, all right, we want to port our mortgage off to this new place in Hamilton, the lender is likely to say, okay, now we'll let you do that as soon as you actually pay out your old mortgage. That's part of it. Mm-hmm. So Omar, it may not work to, as they say, port this mortgage off to the new property, but I'm making those statements from the perspective of a lawyer. The intricacies of how lenders look at these are things where you need to talk to a mortgage broker who really understands how this works and who would look at the specifics of your deal, because every lender has a different program and every lender treats this kind of thing differently. So Sean Impey, our go-to mortgage broker on this program, may be able to answer that if he's on today. And if not, Omar, you could send a message to Sean and ask him that question, and he will give you, I think, a more detailed answer. So that is Omar's question. All right. Now, let's see. On the general side of things, hold on here before we do that. JB Cabral looks like he has a question, or maybe it's a partial question. Any properties? Oh, there's Sean answering our question. Sean says, I think to Omar's question, you need to sell the property and get rid of the mortgage. Need to keep a mortgage in place for an AFS. So you kind of have a collision of two things. I don't think, Omar, that for your case, if these folks want to port their mortgage and you want to take it over by AFS, I don't think it's going to work for you. Yes. All right. Now, I was looking for JB Cabral's question where it looked to be a partial question. Donna, if you find that and there it is. Any properties are you considering to sell? So that is a sort of a statement rather than a question, or maybe it's a question, but I don't know what to do with it. So JB, if you want to add something to that or elaborate, then we'll try and deal with it. Here's one we get all the time, Brent. So the people on this call, and I know you're just getting to know the kind of stuff we're doing. By the way, people, Brent is going through the Rapid Cash program, and he's spending time in a number of those sessions so that he can hear all the stuff that we talk about and be ready to help more of you as we move along. So here's a question we get all the time, and this is really a question of burning interest for people who are looking to get involved in creative real estate. Here's the question: are there any deals out there? Are there any deals out there? And the answer to that is, what do you think the answer to that is, Brent?
There's always a deal out there.
Yes.
And I'll give you an example. Okay. I'm always searching for deals. And I search many avenues. I call my network. I go online. Over the weekend, I went on Kijiji and I looked in the real estate section and land for sale. There was a property that piqued my interest. So I messaged the seller and asked if they would be interested in an AFS. They responded to me and said they would be interested in having the conversation. So there are deals all over the place.
There you are. Yes, there are deals. There are deals all over the place, and so
and just to that point, Barry, I think that there are deals all over, and I think it's just taking the initiative and just asking.
Yes.
Some people don't know what an AFS is, so some sellers provide a quick response and say, "What is an AFS?" Which starts the conversation.
Starts the conversation.
Who knows where that conversation is going to go? And if it turns out to be a good property that's cash flowing positive, well, then we can continue having that discussion and potentially make a deal.
No, that's a fundamental notion in creative real estate. Is there's always a deal. There are deals out there. They're not on every street corner. You might have to look at 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 Kijiji ads and make 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 calls to talk to somebody about whether or not they have any motivation on the creative side. But sooner or later, deals will show up.
Yeah.
So, one of my current favorite kind of illustration of this, and this is partly an answer to the statement, I guess, when people say, "Are there any deals out there?" And you go, "Yes, there's deals out there. There's always deals out there." And they go, "Yeah, but there's way too much competition. How am I going to find a deal? Everybody's looking for those deals." And that's the deal that David Coughlin came on this program and talked about, where 2 blocks from my house here in Old Strathcona, there was a 4-plex listed for sale on the multiple listing service. It had been listed for quite a while. And when David got hold of it, he saw that it had a duplex suite upstairs on each side. So in the 4-plex, there was a suite up and a suite up. And in the basement, there was 3 bedrooms on each side. So that's 3 times 2 is 6 bedrooms that were rented out. And it's kind of a rooming house. So number one, he discovered that was a legal setup. It is allowed under a program called Safe Housing here in Edmonton, which is a program, I think, particular to Edmonton. Anyway, it was allowed. Number 2, when he said to the seller, "Would you be interested in carrying some financing for me?" The seller said yes. So he bought by way of agreement for sale, only put up $15,000 on a purchase of $515,000. And with very little work, the property was cash flowing $3,000 a month for him. So the point of that one is that this was a deal on MLS. This is advertised. Every realtor can look at it. Anybody who wants to look at MLS can look at it. It wasn't even one you had to, dig very hard for. But David found it, looked at it, and turned it into something. So yes, there are deals out there, but you have to take action. You have to make calls. You have to be prepared to be turned down and get lots of no's. But there certainly are deals out there. So
yeah,
that is for sure.
Yeah, I've had lots of no's, and some of those no's have turned out to be the best deals.
Yeah. Well. Oh. Well, now you've piqued my interest. So tell me, how did a deal where the answer was no turn out to be one of your best deals? For example,
I was negotiating on a property. We could not come to an agreement. I have a friend who is also a real estate investor. He then went and purchased the property, and the tenants completely destroyed the property. My friend ended up having to put thousands of dollars back into the property, and he still hasn't recovered that money, which is unfortunate. But
that was okay for you and not so good on the other side. Well, all right. I'm going back to questions here. There's a comment here from Facebook user. Could Omar set up a new mortgage with an AFS with the seller and self under a corporation for a new property out east while keeping the existing mortgage on the current property under AFS with similar mortgage terms? Depends on new property specifics. Of course, single family home or multi-family house property qualifies versus buyer, credit history, rating, income, intent to remove Omar from corporate interest and assume AFS at some point in the future. Depends on each party's goals. That is quite a complicated, I guess, response or new scenario for Omar. And I think I have to let that one sort of percolate for a little bit. Well, more to the comment. Even if the offer is not accepted and someone else wins, follow up with seller's realtor and confirm still interested in case conditions don't get removed or something else, financing falls through. I think that's maybe more following along with what Brent said. They have a no, don't abandon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't abandon. Here's a question. Do you wait for deals to come, search for deals, defer to your team who may be very busy with current market situation, or create deals proactively? Everybody goes at it differently, but depends sometimes I think where you are in your experience cycle. If you've just started out, if you're just are starting to be interested, maybe you might have taken one of my courses, just finished it, or a home study kit, or just you have the germ of the idea that you want to be in creative real estate. I think, if that's where you are, you have to start looking for deals because you don't have any way for deals to come to you because you're just getting started. Your team, doesn't know you very well because you're just getting started. So in that case, we were kind of brand new. I think you have to work hard. You have to look at lots of those Kijiji ads. You have to make those calls and talk about scenarios and make all the mistakes that we all make and feel silly and then just, pick yourself up and make another call. You would have probably checked your materials and asked a few questions after some seller said to you, you really don't know what you're talking about, do you? And you go, no, I kind of don't. I'm just sort of learning. And then, you have to go back at it again. So where you are in the experience cycle depends. If you're Andrea Workington, she has a network who refer tons of deals to her. They know who she is and what she does. that she's very good at it. I mean, I don't think Andrea even advertises anymore. So it completely depends on where you are in the cycle. Oh, pardon me. Big sneeze. Just looking at questions here, folks, as we go along. Donna says, don't count the yeses, count the nos. Those are the ones you have to get through. Yeah, that's true. You know, if you're getting no's, I think what it means is you're going to get a yes, because sooner or later you will get a yes. Mm-hmm. So as we roll along here tonight, before the evening is out, I don't want to finish up until we do this. So this is kind of a Jeopardy situation. And the question is, why would a seller do that? And so your job is to figure out the answer to that question. And before we sign off at 6 o'clock, we'll roll our way through that one. All right. Why would a seller do that? That's the question. Hey, what else? Should I incorporate? Should I incorporate it? I know that we've chatted about should I incorporate a few times, but because it's the question that over my investing real estate career of about 35 years, the one that comes up probably 25 times a year, I guess we can talk about that one. Brent, as you go through the RCP materials, you'll hear this question asked, and what we end up saying to people on the should I incorporate question is it's really a question where you first have to start, we think, with your accountant. People always think it's the lawyer they talk to first, but really it's the accountant that you talk to first. Because what you want to do is sit down with your accountant, hopefully who's been your accountant for a while, an accountant who's filed your tax returns for the last number of years, who knows you and your family and your personal situation. If you have a company, who knows what's going on in your company and who's also doing your company tax return, who knows what your plans are. A good accountant will chat with you. They won't just do the taxes and get you in to sign the return. They'll talk to you about your financial plan and where you're going and when you expect to get there, and how you're retiring, all those kinds of things. And then when you come along and say to yourself, I'm interested in investment real estate, should I incorporate? Should I set up one of those 3-tier companies that our friends in the US love to say that you just can't buy a piece of real estate without having, a hold co and an op co and a different co. And so the answer is, we believe you should talk to your accountant first and find out what they think a company does for you based on what they know about you and what your plans are. And then if the accountant says, yes, for this reason, and this reason, you should incorporate, then we work with the accountant. As lawyers, we work with the accountant to set up the structure that the accountant recommends would fit for you. You ever have to answer that question, Brent? Do people say, Brent, I think I should incorporate, or do I need to incorporate for my real estate portfolio?
Yeah, I've had that a question a few times, and I answer very similar to you, Barry. And I say your first step is to speak with your accountant. There are advantages and disadvantages to incorporating. I think the accountants are best to answer those questions. Each person's financial situation is different, and as the accountants will be able to help to mitigate tax situations.
Yeah. Tax is often the reason that tax or tax considerations is often the reason why people think they might want to incorporate. And folks, what tax accountants and tax lawyers do is they do their best to help people organize their affairs in a legal way to minimize their tax situation, all within the law and within the rules. So every time a smart tax accountant or tax lawyer figures out a way to help somebody within the rules, if too many people do it, the next federal budget usually plugs up those loopholes. So you need someone who stays abreast of the rules, because the best loophole, legal loopholes, mind you, doesn't stay open for very long. And I know around Field, we have a big tax department, and our tax group was hugely busy just prior to the federal budget, which came out last week or the week before, because it was predicted that there were going to be a number of tax changes which would change the rules. And so people wanted to do things that were advantageous to them under the old rules before the new rules come in. So for about the last 3 months, you couldn't talk to a tax lawyer at that Field, because they were just frantically helping people organize for the coming budget. And that every time there's a budget, that happens, and budgets come out, frequently.
Yeah.
COVID has sort of stopped the feds from doing it, but they come out frequently, and the rules change frequently. So you got to stay up on that, and accountants do it better than lawyers do, I think.
And there's also different lending criteria from the bank's perspective that also need to be taken into consideration.
That's true. Sean Impey has helped us out with that, and there are different rules for borrowing personally or borrowing corporately. And sometimes people go, seems might be harder to borrow corporately. Different rules. Maybe I got to pay a little more interest. So that's another very practical matter that you have to look at when you're asking the question, should I incorporate?
And there's generally more costs associated with incorporating. You're going to have more for taxes. You have to file your corporate taxes, your personal taxes. You're going to have registration fees that you need to pay every year to keep incorporated. Yeah,
I mean, to get started, there's a cost to incorporation. There is that extra tax return every year that your accountant has to prepare, and a corporate return is much more expensive than a personal return. And then yes, the annual registration costs. $250 or so, $250 to keep the annual registration going. And I'll tell you,
at the end of the day,
number of people who've got those 3 corporations set up, and they find that they didn't like investment real estate, and they've got 3 times incorporation cost and 3 times registration costs, and finally they give up. So don't do it unless it really fits for you, on advice.
Yes.
So that's that. All right. Well, let's talk about creative strategies. Particularly and individually, I guess, on the rent-to-own side, otherwise called lease options. Let's talk about lease options, and I want you folks to think about lease rent-to-own questions that you have. But one question that we get asked a lot is, in a lease option, number one, when I get paid some option money up front, so just a quick review, if we do a rent to own with somebody, what you want as a person who's going to lease a property to a potential tenant, to a tenant buyer, hoping that they will buy it down the road under your option, what you want is to get a good chunk of option money up front, because the stats show that the bigger the chunk of option money you get, the more likely your tenant buyer is to close down the road, because they don't want to lose that money. So that's skin in the game counts. And so we're just going to take as an example a lease option I was just working on this week, where the upfront chunk of option money is $25,000. So that's a pretty good downstroke. Go ahead, Brent.
There very quickly, Barry, on that point. I did have a client once who had an option, and I think it's good to note that you want to be specific and make the option non-refundable.
Why is that, Brent?
Well, you want to keep your money. They did not specify. It went to court, and the court made them give the money back.
Okay. Yes, that's a very good. It's a really good point. And any of the options that we have, and you'll see it in the Rapid Cash program, any of those examples make it clear that any option money paid is non-refundable. And folks, the reason it should be non-refundable anyway, without saying, but as Brent points out, you do have to say it, is that when you do a rent to own, a lease option, what you're doing is you're selling people an option. An option is a right to buy. They're purchasing the right to buy a property for a certain price at a certain time. And that's why they pay you. That's why they pay you money. But even though it should be non-refundable in any event, if it's properly drafted otherwise, specifically, the option has to say that the option money is non-refundable. Absolutely does. All right. Now, Brent, is that, do you have any more to tell us about that one? Was there other circumstances surrounding the option, or was it, I don't know if you recall that.
You know, Barry, to be honest with you, I don't recall. It was about 6-7 years ago.
Sure.
But it was a battle, but ultimately the court decided that the money should go back to the purchasers or renters, which the court found. Okay.
Now, one thing about options is they're a kind of a class of contract that judges don't like to touch very much. They just want the option to stand on its own. So it's really important to have a clearly drafted option that sets out everything as specifically and exactly as you possibly can. But the question I get lots is, and let's use my recent file that just closed as an example, the chunk of option money paid before the tenant buyer moved into the property was $25,000. So the question people ask me lots is, Barry, do I have to keep that money in trust and just let it sit until the tenant buyer closes out and actually buys the property 3 years down the road? Because this is a 3-year option. And the answer to that is no. You don't have to keep that money in trust. That money is your money. You sold him an option to purchase. If he does what he's supposed to do and you do what you're supposed to do, he can buy the property 3 years from now for the price you've negotiated. And so that's what he's purchased, and therefore you get to take and use that option money in any way you want right now. Now, if he doesn't exercise the option and doesn't buy the property in 3 years, then you've had the money and you've used it and it's your money. You don't have to do anything with it. On the other hand, if he does buy, then you have to give him credit on the purchase price for the $25,000. He's paid $25,000. It goes against the price. And what you have to understand is that if you take and use the money now, which is fine, 3 years down the road, you're going to get whatever the purchase price is, less that $25,000. And nobody seems to mind that because they get the use of the $25,000 for the 3 years. So that's the answer to the question. Can I take that? Can I take the option money and keep it in trust? No, you don't have to do that. And can I use the money now? The answer is yes. So that's something that comes up in rent to own all the time. Something else that we get, Brent, a lot is people want simplicity. Investors want simplicity. And I've seen many an option agreement that comes from some of the U.S. gurus, the late night television guys. People have spent tons and tons and tons of money, $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 to take those courses, and they get some paperwork with it. They get some documents to use, and many times those U.S. documents have a lease and an option combined in one document. And so the question we get is, should I use a combined document where lease and option are in one, or should I use separate documentation? And I don't know, Brent, have you run into that at all? And you may not have, because I know that although you invest, you're just kind of getting going on the creative side of things. Have you run into that question?
Yeah, no, Barry, I haven't really ran into that question. Well, I shouldn't say no. I have ran into the question once or twice. And what I would say to that is you always want to defer to documents or agreements that are relevant within the jurisdiction that you're buying or residing in.
Yes.
So documents in, let's use the state of Colorado, for example. The state of Colorado may not be or may not comply with the laws in the province of Alberta or BC, or wherever you're buying your property.
Good point. Good point. That's important to hear, folks. As much as the concept of a rent-to-own is pretty well understood across Canada, in all the provinces and territories, and in all the 50 states. If you went to any real estate meetup group anywhere on the North American continent and said, anybody here done a rent-to-own, or anybody know what a rent-to-own is, you would be able to find people who understand the general concept. But specifically, each state has their own rules and each province has their own rules that wrap around the general legal concept. So good point, Brent. You need documents that fit for the province and jurisdiction that you live in. And then the other part of it is I think we've learned that really we think it works better if you have a separate option and a separate lease. And so if you've been in real estate at all and you've got a buy and hold property, you have a lease, and as long as it's a good solid lease and you like it, you can use that as the rent part of your rent to own. We like to keep the option and the lease separate. It's one of the biggest reasons for that is that a tenant buyer is a tenant until they exercise the option and they're ready to buy. And so if as a tenant they don't pay you rent, then you might have to evict them. And if you want to evict them, you have to go off to the Residential Disputes Tenancy Board or the tribunal wherever you live. Whoever decides rental disputes in the province that you live in, you have to end up going off there. And if you're arguing in front of them, what you want to argue as a landlord is the lease. You don't want the tenant buyer going, yes, I know I'm offside the lease, but according to the option, which is on the next page and in the same document, and then the tribunal guys, the RTDRS guys go, whoa, there's an option involved here? Okay, we can't deal with this. We have to punt this up to a higher court. So we really think that the answer to the question is, should I have separate documents? The answer to that is yes. Certainly here in Alberta, and probably in most places in Canada, I would say my advice is start out thinking I need separate documents and let some experienced lawyer tell you you're wrong. So that's an RTO question that we get as well. And then another one we get on the RTO side of things is, what if it comes to the option exercise time? So in our example, the tenant buyer was supposed to close out the deal in 3 years. What if it comes to the 3 years and property values have dropped? Property values have dropped. What do we do? What do we do? And the answer is you have to negotiate. But if property values have dropped and they go to their bank, and let's say you're selling, the sale price in 3 years is $400,000, and the bank says, okay, well, we've done our appraisal and we think it's worth $380,000, and we will only give you a mortgage based on $380,000. What do you do about your option that you sold for $400,000? There's a missing $20,000 there. And so, Brent and I have chatted about this. We know that this is a negotiated thing. You can say, oh, well, I guess it'll only go for $380,000, so I guess I'll sell to you for $380,000. Or you can dig in your heels and say, sorry, my price is $400,000. It's not my fault. It's not my fault the price dropped. I'm keeping your option money and I'm carrying on. And remember, the knife cuts both ways. If the value of the property was $420,000, your tenant buyer isn't probably going to share the windfall of $20,000 with you. So, and the third thing that you say is likely you negotiate. And so we've seen people make agreements that they will pay the extra $20,000 on the side, pay it back over a number of years. We've also seen, and this is the more likely scenario, we've seen people, the owner and the tenant agree to renegotiate and extend the option for another amount of time, hoping that the equity price will rise or that circumstances change. So if you come to the end of your deal and the value of the property is worth less than what you agreed the tenant buyer would pay, there's a whole bunch of factors to look at, but most people try and save the deal by extending is the answer I see the most often.
This is when you contact Barry McGUIRE and ask for some great advice to negotiate.
Yeah, lots of people do phone when that happens, and then we go over the questions. Sometimes we bring it to the group. Now so that's a bit on rent to own. Let's go over to joint ventures, because Brent, as you said, you wouldn't have been able to buy all these properties without hooking up with some people. So your first two deals were joint ventures with your dad, I guess.
That's right.
Now, I know your dad, and he's a completely unreliable fellow. And so I'm pretty sure you got a really solid joint venture agreement all signed up and didn't make a move without making him sign in blood. Is that how you and your dad looked at it?
Well, I think doing deals with a family can go really well. Unfortunately, I've seen it where, and thankfully it hasn't happened in my situation, but it can also go really poorly. So I think the main thing is if you're venturing with a family member, is to go into it with a win-win mindset. I think it's a great idea to always seek legal advice for each party, to get legal advice, have a JV drafted so that everyone is on the same page going into the deal. I find that where these matters can go south is when one person puts in an X amount of money and they have a certain idea in mind and how they want to exit. The other person who may not have money into the deal, or very little money, has another idea on how the deal is going to happen. And when it comes to exiting, like I said, they both are on different pages, and a dispute arises. So if you're going to JV, I guess I should say this, whether it's with family member or not, I think it's always a good idea to both parties negotiate a fair JV, each party obtain legal advice upon signing the JV, so that everyone everyone starts the venture on the same page.
Yeah. No, that is, it is absolutely true. Deals can go sideways with family, and do often go sideways with family. And one of the reasons is that they haven't done what Brent says you need to do, which is have detailed discussions about the joint venture and a detailed written agreement. Often when you're dealing with family or with friends, people tend to gloss over the hard details, because I mean, it's my friend Bill, it's my brother Bob. I mean, we've known each other forever. We get along. We never had a dispute about anything. So
the start of business adventures is always wonderful. Everyone is excited.
Yes.
And then the business starts. And unfortunately, sometimes businesses can go sideways. And what do you do when the business goes sideways if you do not have anything in writing?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, It's hard enough when you have a joint venture agreement in writing that's been well thought out and well explained. And when you start out, you're pretty confident. And I think any independent third party looking at it would go, you know what? To me, it looks like these two people have really talked about their joint venture. They've got a good written agreement. You know, this is starting out about as well as it can possibly start out. That's the best of circumstances. And as you know, as Brent said, people kind of change their mind as something goes along. They sour on the notion of the joint venture. So the money partners put up all the money, and things aren't performing quite as well as anybody thought. It doesn't look like it's really going to be the money maker that he thought. Maybe it's doing okay, but it's not great. And he goes, you know what? I want to get my money out and get on to something else. But that wasn't the discussion, and that wasn't what the deal says. And so kind of expected to be a 5-year joint venture before there would be a rediscussion of the terms. And at the 2-year mark, somebody wants out. That's hard enough when you started out nicely and explained it nicely, and you have a good solid joint venture agreement. It's way more difficult when it's family or friends, because if the parties dig in their heels, then what's the answer to a dispute that can't be resolved? You talk to Brent, and Brent says, we've got a great litigation department.
Yeah. And are you prepared to sue your father or your mother or your brother or your sister?
And what do you think the answer to that is for most folks, Brent?
The answer probably is no.
No. So the venture itself goes sideways. There might be money lost, and relations, even, you know, more importantly, family. We all say family is the most important thing, and you know, it really is. In the end, you can usually rely on your family, and for sure, and not somebody else. But relationships can be ruined forever over an investment that goes sideways. So there's a question: should I invest with family? Well, you got to be careful and be prepared for maybe saying, I guess I might walk away from that because I don't want to never talk to my mom or my dad ever again in the rest of my life. So there's one joint venture situation. Independent legal advice. So Brett, you said that it's best if, you know, for family, and I think you probably believe for other people that aren't family, that they should have a good solid joint venture agreement, and they each should have independent legal advice. How tough is it to get people to go and get their independent advice when they're all lovey-dovey at that initial sunshine part of the deal right at the beginning, when everybody loves each other?
I think it's always a difficult I think it's always a difficult conversation to have at the start. But I think that having that difficult conversation of, hey, it's great that we're entering into this partnership, but I think we should enter enter into a JV. And at the same time, one of us or each of us should get our own lawyers when doing this, because one party may, or both parties may be putting up a substantial amount of money. And as I said, if a fight ensues, then it's always good to defer back to that agreement. I know, but it is difficult to have. I think it is difficult to have that conversation at the start.
It is,
and no one wants. I shouldn't say no one. It's hard to have that conversation, and but once the conversation is completed and once the documents are finalized, from my experience, it eases a lot of stress.
Yeah. You know, if it's written, you can refer to it later. Sometimes people forget what the deal is. Honestly, they just honestly forget and think it's this, think it's X when it's Y. So
The other
We have some,
thing is that the document doesn't have to be set in stone. The
Sure.
document can be amended as the business grows or as you buy more properties.
or as circumstances change. Somebody's
That's right.
circumstances might change, and the parties might be able to modify the agreement to fit the changed circumstances. So
That's right. Yeah.
we've got another joint venture question here. This is a question about how people take title, the legalities of having a joint venture agreement and not being on mortgage or title. So it looks to me like this is the circumstance where one party is going to be on title and the other isn't. When is it legal that a money partner qualifies for a mortgage, but the working partner is not on title? I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, it certainly comes up a lot that the money partner is the person who applies for the mortgage and who goes on the title. And if there's a working partner, or the investor or working partner, sometimes they will both apply for the mortgage. I think a lot of people ideally would like to have both the money partner and the working partner both on the title. And so they apply for a mortgage in both names. And sometimes the lender says, let's say it's Brent and I am the money partner and Brent is the working partner. And they go, oh, Brent, you already own 15 properties. So, under our rules, you can't have any more mortgages. And Brent goes, well, gee, that doesn't seem fair. These are all positive cash flow properties. Look, I'm making, $8,000 a month positive cash flow from my properties. Why is that? Why is that bad? And the bank goes, sorry, Brent, that's the rule. So people start out, and you have to find out what the banking rules are. Some banks don't like any other, they don't like joint venture partners. They don't want silent partners. And there are a number of lenders who are like that. And so I think you have to chat with your mortgage broker and ask if there are any rules for the lenders he's thinking of around joint ventures and who's on title, because sometimes there are rules. And if there are rules about, maybe they say they don't like anybody else, any other non-title person having an interest in the property. If they say that, then you have to figure out whether or not you can actually do the deal with the person, because what you might have to do is you might have to say, okay, well, we're interested in this property. And according to the rules, according to the application, I can't be on the title, and the bank says there can't be any beneficial person like me who has an interest in the property who isn't on the title. So, you know what, money partner, you're going to have to go and qualify on your own, and we don't have an agreement. Mm-hmm. We can't have an agreement as you work your way through the buying and mortgaging process, because you have to be able to answer honestly to your lender. And then when the deal is done and you've acquired the property, then you can come back and talk to me, and we'll talk about whether or not we want to create a joint venture after the fact. Mm-hmm. That allows you to honestly answer the question. And it means that if your money partner decides to say, you know what, I think I'm okay without you. So I've bought it. I put up all the money. I've qualified for the mortgage, and I guess I'm going to keep this one for myself. Yeah. And after the fact, in order to really make this work and be honest about it, you are exposed to your money partner saying, I'm not sharing. Because there is no deal. There's nothing to share. After the fact, if you want to get together and do it, then you negotiate it. So that's kind of Brent. I like a couple of the comments there. The comment reading now, if a JV agreement is tough to do and negotiate, you might want to think twice about that partner. And that goes back to maybe to the start of our conversation when I said that some of the best deals are the ones you have to say no to. So that could link there. The other point before that is
referred to getting hit by a bus. And with any of as Barry mentioned, I have a business in the U.S. And I think one of the general rules I have of when I'm starting a business is I want to get the business to a point, and I've always said this, where I call it if Brent gets hit by a bus rule. So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, then that business is still operating, and nothing happens to the business on a day-to-day.
Yeah, there are ways to phrase things, and to say if I get hit by a bus, at least it's in right hand. That's way more. That's a way better way to
Not
say
that
it.
I want to get hit by a bus, but I love that.
No. The last part of this question: how would a working partner be able to keep qualifying for mortgages without running out of room? Well, anonymous person who asked this question, if you can figure out, because I don't know the answer to this. If you can figure out the answer to how can a working partner, that is the partner who's already got mortgages and is maybe running out of the qualifying room, if you can figure out how to keep them qualifying for mortgages without running out of room, you will be the hero, the messiah to the real estate investing community. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know there is an answer to it. All I can think of is you have to work with a very good mortgage broker who understands the various lending rules with different lenders, because they do have different rules and different qualification procedures, and they change. Just because it's one rule today doesn't mean it's the same rule 3 weeks from now. It's kind of like making sure your accountant is up on tax questions. So we'll answer Irina's question, and then we're going to get on to the answer to the Jeopardy question. Why would a seller do that? What is Irina saying? Brent, can you see that question?
It says, when the property would be purchased, can it be registered to an oldest child with disabilities for their retirement when the oldest child cannot work anymore and ready to retire by age?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, so I'm going to defer right to you, Barry.
Oh, thanks, Brent. I'm glad you participated there by reading that question for us. So there's a couple things that come to mind. I know that there are I believe there are registered plans for disabled people where you can save money. You might be able to work something into that. But, any property when it's purchased with the consent of lender could be registered in the name of a child. So this is a person under the age of majority, 18 or 19, I think, across the country. And if that was an oldest child with disabilities, then you can put the property in the child's name. There are rules about how any income and expenses would be attributed during the time that the child was still a child and not of the age of majority. I think those rules change after they get over the age of majority. But yes, you can do this kind of thing, and I've seen parents do this for their children. It's kind of a university. It's kind of a savings plan for university. They put properties in the names of their kids when they're really young and let the properties grow in value and start to produce income for when they're going to university. And so I think some of the concepts that people use there would also work if you have a disabled child where you're trying to make sure that they have some income. So I would look at registered plans, and then this is also probably a pretty good accounting question. All right. Now, we're getting to the end here, and the last item for tonight is what is the answer to the question, why would a seller do that? And so let me give you an example. So we have a student, someone who's taken our course, found a property advertised, looked like it was being advertised for sale for probably $280,000 when the value was $425,000. Our student did as we coached them to do, said to the owner, "You're crazy. You should sell this with a realtor and get a whole bunch of money. Why are you selling it possibly to me for this low price?" I don't like realtors. I would never work with a realtor. Well, why don't you, work up a joint venture partner who could take it on and spruce it up and rent it out and get some positive cash flow? No, I hate working with people. And no matter what our students suggested in terms of another solution other than selling to them for the very low price, the owner said, nope, nope. And finally, our student said to the seller, well, why are you dealing with me? There must be people beating down your door to do this. And the seller said, yeah, there's a lot of people. A lot of people answered my ad, especially when they, took a look at the price. And I just want to move out to the country and get an acreage with my dogs. And I don't really care. I don't mind them losing money. I understand what I'm doing. But you know what? You're the only person who treated me nicely and who wasn't really trying to steal the property from me. The only person who recognized where I was at. And so that's one example. The second example is one of our students was contacted a lady. She was living in a house and she wanted to move to a condo, and she was a bit of a hoarder. And she was looking to sell her property for, I think, about $72,000 less than what the market value would be. And again, the win-win coaching, and I heard you say that earlier, Brent, win-win is so important. And we say that all the time to our students. We always play for win-win. Pointed out to the lady that she could do a lot better than selling to our student. In the end, the reason that they wanted to sell at such a low price was that they were totally not able to deal with their house. They were not a really a certifiable hoarder, but they just couldn't deal with the notion of cleaning out the house for a new person for all the stuff they'd collected over 40 years. And when our students said, I'll help you, can leave that all to me. Don't even worry one thing about it. That was enough for the seller to say, I'm selling to you. And so the answer to the question, why would a seller do that? I mean, why would a seller sell for so much less than market value? Is that, and this is so important, people, this is so important. You cannot predict or explain seller motivation. Sellers will do things that you would never think of doing, that are completely logical to them, and that, just make no sense to you or maybe to lots of people. So the answer to the question, why would a seller do that, is don't try and explain seller motivation. There is no explaining it. Sellers do what they want to do, and you will be totally surprised at the deals you can find when you just talk to a seller and figure out what it is that they want and then try and help them with that. All right. Well, we come to the end of tonight's Q&A session with Brent giving me a hand. I appreciate that, Brent. And so, folks, for tonight, that's all we got. So I'm going to say goodbye. Wish everybody a very good rest of the evening. It's 6 o'clock in Edmonton. Donna and I are going to go out for a big walk, and then I'm going to watch the Oilers thrash Vancouver later. Sorry, all you Canucks fans. Good night, everybody. We'll see you.